G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to go through 5 of the most important stretches that you need to do if you're a runner. So if you're someone who runs recreationally or you take it a little bit more seriously, whether you run short distances, long distances, whether you run on trails or on the road, whether you run fast or slow, whether you're old or young, these 5 exercises are probably the best 5 exercises I've seen, the most important 5 exercises and stretches to do over my 15 years as a physical therapist. And I think these exercises are really, really important because they go after the root dysfunction or the root cause of a lot of peripheral dysfunction that a lot of runners get. So if you're someone who gets plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, whether you get some tibialis posterior pain, whether you have bunions, big toe dysfunction, shin splints, recurrent ankle sprains, calf pain, calf tears, soleus issues, the list goes on. Knee pain, any non-traumatic knee pain, whether it's patellofemoral joint syndrome, ITB syndrome, patellar tendonitis, fat pad impingements, even if you've got a bit of arthritis in your knee, and working all the way up to some quads dysfunction, hip flexor issues, hamstring issues. Doesn't matter what you get as a runner, these 5 stretches will hopefully help you conquer the root cause of that dysfunction. Now, before we get to what those exercises are, it's important to sort of recognize a couple of things in terms of how we think about running injuries, because I think as a physical therapist, one of the things that I sort of hear the most from runners is that running caused their pain. That you didn't have pain when you started running and something about your running session made you end up with pain or an injury of some sort. And I think the really important perspective that I can give on that specific topic is to sort of think about it a particular way. And I think the best way to think about that is that running by definition is normal. It's something that the body is designed to do. It's why we have Achilles tendons, or it's one of the benefits of having an Achilles tendon is that we are mechanically designed and able to run and should be able to run for our entire lives. There's no point in our lives where running should become a problem in a perfect world. Obviously that's a little bit different, a different reality for many people at the moment, but the expectation is still there that running by definition is normal and shouldn't cause you pain, even though for a lot of people it feels that way. The other thing to consider with running is that, as I said before, running doesn't necessarily give you something brand new, but instead it tends to be the last straw. So what we see a lot clinically is when someone comes in with an injury, we can keep working our way back down the line to figure out what the mechanical problems were that set that tissue up to become sore while you ran. So one of the things I like to think about with running is that if we can think about running as an activity or a repetitious movement that exposes hidden dysfunction that people bring into running from the rest of their day. So if you're someone who runs for 1 hour a day every day, which is a lot on the surface, that still leaves another 15 or 16 waking hours throughout the day where you can accrue subtle dysfunction. And again, when we get to these exercises in a second, you'll hopefully understand why that is and why that's important. So I think if you're someone who has any running injuries, or you're someone who just wants to run better, this video is squarely directed towards you guys. And I'm not just talking about people who run as a sport or recreationally, but anyone who needs to run as part of something else. So if you play any other sports, whether you play football, whether you play basketball, whether you sprint for other different activities, these ideas are the same. And if you're looking to prevent getting an issue, looking to recover faster from an issue and get at the root cause of why that issue happened, but also you're someone who just wants to run better, then again, these ideas are hopefully going to be beneficial for you guys. So be happy to hang around to the end, get through all 5 of these exercises and then sort of start putting them into practice. Hopefully you'll see what I mean based on what they do for you and your injuries, and more importantly, your performance out on the road or out on the trail. So, I guess that's the main context that I wanted to provide at the start of the video. It's obviously a lot of information, but the main thing is to think that running isn't the cause of your injury. It just exposes something that you've taken into running that you just weren't aware of until running exposed that. So if we can get at what that dysfunction is, then obviously we can help you recover faster, but then make sure that it doesn't come back again at some point. Because I know if you're watching this, the majority of you guys who might be injured or sore or looking for answers have tried something like rest. You've tried stopping running, you've been told to stop running, or you felt the need to stop running to let something heal or let something settle down. And a really common issue with that is that a lot of people, when they start running again, just have the same problems crop back up again, because yes, it may have settled down that initial short-term irritation, but it hasn't fixed the underlying features of why that tissue became irritated in the first place. And I think the last point that I want to sort of leave you guys on before we get to the exercises is probably the most important, in that irrespective of what issue you guys might have from running, whether it's a foot issue, a shin issue, a knee issue, a hip issue, a thigh issue, a lower back issue, irrespective of what they are, we also need to stop thinking of injuries as isolated problems, where you have a foot injury like plantar fasciitis, or maybe some tib post dysfunction or flat feet. We need to stop thinking of those things as a foot problem. We need to think of that as the part of the entire leg, or the part of the entire lower half that isn't tolerating how the entire section is moving. And you can have some dysfunction in your hips or some low back dysfunction, and that can create a wave of mechanical issues that ends up annoying something in your foot. So if you're treating that foot, doing all the right things, just doing some isolated stretches, some strength work, you're doing PT, you're having all the stuff that you're supposed to do to treat the foot, but you're missing the bigger picture, then I think that explains a lot of why some people, hopefully not everyone, but a lot of people do try and do all the right things, but ultimately don't get anywhere with it because they haven't treated the context that those issues have become a thing within. So again, by the end of this video, hopefully you guys have a really good understanding of what sort of things or what touch points you need to go after to improve the way your entire lower half functions, so you can give those tissues a chance to get better long term. And that's the goal for everyone. So that's enough of that. We'll get straight into it. So I think the first thing to talk about is we want to give you an exercise for ankle stiffness, ankle joint stiffness. From what I see clinically, it is by far the most common and important handbrake on normal leg function. If you have stiff ankles, it can set you up for plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, tib post dysfunction, flat feet, bunions, shin splints, calf tears, the majority of knee pain, as it turns out, whether that's traumatic or non-traumatic ACL issues, patellofemoral joint syndrome, ITB syndrome, whatever you're sort of thinking, what it does, and the reason why ankle stiffness is so important to address with a stretch, is that it is almost an immovable object or a immovable resistance that your body has to, instead of bend through, it has to work around long term. And to see this visually, hopefully you can see this in the video, but for example, we can see this in a perfect squat, for example. So if I was to keep my feet straight, rotate my knees out with my feet staying still, if I squat down as deep as I feel comfortable going, if I run into some ankle range, so let's just say that instead of having, I don't have perfect range, but let's just say that instead of being able to bend to here, I can only bend to here before I run into the end of my ankle range. So what I have to do is, as soon as I run into that ankle range, I can't go through it anymore. So every step or every time my foot hits the ground, I have to go around it to find a solution to that problem. And if the body is designed to move in a more linear shape, as soon as I contact that position and dump into something else, then all of a sudden the entire leg is going to be loaded up differently. So again, that Achilles, the foot, the knee, the shin, whatever it is, instead of it being loaded in the way that it's mechanically designed to, every single step, every single stride that we take is loading tissue up differently than what it's designed for. So what we need to do, and one of the first exercise, which I think is probably one of the most important to do, involves using a power band. So these bands are basically the thick bands. You can use anything. If you're from Australia, you can use an Oki strap. This is like a monster band or a jump stretch band, or you can use some really thick, strong TheraBand, whatever you feel gives you enough resistance here. But you want the band at the base of your ankle, and you want to stretch it out as far as you feel comfortable. Now, generally the band would be pulling behind here, but my ankle point's obviously on a weird angle. But all you need to do with this is keeping your heel down, bringing your hips past your foot. We then want to drop down a little bit and really hinge that ankle as far as you feel comfortable. And the band is going to pull that ankle, distract that ankle joint, and really target the deeper joint stiffness. Now, traditional stretches like your calf stretches, your soleus stretches, where you're just bending your leg up against a wall or trying to stretch the calf and soleus, or the gastroc and the soleus, sorry, it doesn't get to the deeper joint stiffness. So this, in my opinion, trumps all of the calf stretches that we tend to do. It's far more effective because it gets to the deeper underlying ankle joint stiffness. So we want to stay here. And again, if you can imagine that the band's pulling from behind here as opposed to the front, we want to make sure that when you're stretching and mobilizing your ankle, that you're not tracking inwards trying to find the end of your range. We want to make sure that you're plowing through that ankle range, if not out to the side a little bit, and allowing the band to mobilize it in that position, so that when you come out of that after a few minutes, all of a sudden you have all this extra mobility through that ankle joint you didn't have before. So again, it's very, very high on the list, potentially number one of the most important stretches for runners to do to prevent injury, to recover from injury, and to improve performance. I can't speak highly enough of that banded ankle stretch. Now, we've covered a few of these exercises on the channel before, so please feel free to go through the back catalogue if you want a little bit more explanation, and also some context if you have some specific issues like some plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendonitis or whatever it is. We have videos on those topics. So, but again, I wanted to put all these into one video so that you've got a bit of a one-stop shop to work on if you're a runner and you want to get better. So exercise number one is the banded ankle stretch. Exercise number two is, it's called the couch stretch. Now, a lot more people are familiar with the couch stretch than they used to be. Thanks to the work of someone like Callie Starretts of the Ready State, ex-Mobility Wad. He sort of invented it. It's a must-do stretch for anyone with any form of knee pain, hip dysfunction, even a lot of the foot issues we can sort of trace back to being really stiff through the front of the hip, tight through those hip flexors. So the way that I like to do this is, again, I always recommend using a band here because it's really, really important. But if you don't have access to a band, you don't necessarily need one. It just gives you more benefit than not using the band. So essentially what we do is we want to put the bands and hook the band up into the base of that gluteal fold, up the top of the hip. We want to really stretch back into a chair, essentially. So for a lot of people, doing this on the floor is going to be a very horrible experience. But for anyone who can get down here, please do. But I'd recommend doing this on a chair. So your back knee is on the chair, the back leg here is resting up against the back of the chair, and this foot is actually on the floor. So you're not level, but if you're a little bit more advanced and you feel more comfortable like I do, you can do this on the floor with a band. But the key to the exercise is that you want to squeeze those glutes, keep your back nice and straight. And you want to straighten yourself up as far as you feel comfortable without wanting to vomit and pass out. So we're looking for some real tightness and stiffness through the front of the hip. Again, if whatever version of this is quite taxing for you, you might find that you won't be able to come straight vertical to begin with. All you need to do is just come up as high as you feel comfortable, which could be here, until you feel like you've found a comfortable version of this stretch. And we want to make sure that you stay here, allow this tissue to open up. Again, this is really important for anyone with any low back issues. You have hip flexor pain, if you have any quad dysfunction, any patellar tendonitis. As I said, even if you are dealing with feet that turn out, collapsed arches, calf issues, Achilles issues, plantar fasciitis, this has a real impact on the body, because if you are stiff in sort of hip extension, similar to the ankle joint being stiff, if your body or your leg is trying to extend backwards through a certain plane to keep everything in line, if you run into a certain amount of tightness, it has to rotate around that tightness to come back. So you see a lot of people sort of rotating outwards. You can see people who sort of flare their legs out to the side when they run, and you get this rotational sort of movement of the leg as opposed to just a piston moving up and down and loading those tissues perfectly. So again, stretch number two is called the couch stretch. Can't speak highly enough of that one either. It's a brutal stretch, so please find a version of that that you feel comfortable with, but you won't be disappointed. It's sort of the anti-sitting stretch. For all of you out there who spend a lot of time sitting, getting tight through here, being able to extend that hip with the knee flexed and the toes pointed is really undoing a lot of the things that tend to be accrued from sitting a lot. And again, that's one of the biggest reasons why we bring a lot of this dysfunction into running. We just bring these handbrakes in, and running just exposes them, and some tissue around that handbrake tends to get sore. So again, really important exercise number two. Now, the third exercise is more of a muscular stretch, and this is probably the main muscular stretch that I would recommend as a PT trying to solve running related injuries. A lot of the other ones are still good, whether it's calf stretches, general quad stretches, and the like, but I find that going after the deeper joint stiffness, like we did with the ankle stretch, like we did with the couch stretch, which does the front of the joint capsule as well, some of the soft tissue. The next stretch after this is another hip joint stretch that goes after the capsule, and there will be a lower back stretch, which is more joint related and joint capsule related as well. But this one tends to be a crucial piece of the puzzle as well, and it's called the pigeon stretch. Now, a lot of people will be familiar with this. It's essentially just an external rotation exercise at the hip, because a lot of people are lacking that external rotation to be able to keep their knee and their foot in a really strong, stable shape when they're running. And they often get dumped into this position because they can't rotate out. And obviously, if you've got a stiff hip at the front, a stiff ankle, and you're tight through the hip, then it's just a pathway, a direct path to dumping into more of a valgus knee, which again is the root of a lot of evil with running. So what the exercise is, again, I'd recommend doing this up on the bed or on a table or on a chair, but for those more mobile, all you're doing is rotating your hip, rotating your foot under, and you're just extending your back leg back as far as you feel comfortable. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure that you're not hinging down through your back. You want to stay up nice and tall through your back as much as possible, and then just see how low you can get that knee so that you're sort of relatively 90 degrees of rotation. Again, if you're up on something, a bit more in sort of this position as opposed to this position down low. But for me, in the purposes of this video, this is appropriate. And again, you want to sort of hunt around. You're looking for some of that muscular tightness through that glute. Again, it's probably going to be horrible for some people, but that's the point, I guess. So again, when you're looking around, finding where that tightness is, and because this is a muscular stretch, we want to use what's called contract relax stretching. We want to use proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF for short. And all it is finding a position that feels tight, exposes some muscle tightness, and you want to squeeze that tightness for about 5 seconds. So I'm tensing my butt cheeks, and then I want to relax, and then I should be able to drop a little bit deeper, and then I want to repeat that process. So I want to give it a good squeeze, and then relax, and then I can drop down a little bit deeper again, give it a good squeeze, drop down a little bit deeper again. So we want to keep moving through that stretch so that when we squat again, and hopefully you'll see this, as I squat down, this side feels like it goes out a lot further than my right side does. So keeping my feet still, it feels like that side now externally rotates better, which again is really, really important. So, I don't know why I'm puffing, but again, so that hip external rotation stretch is made all the more important by that contract relax technique. So if it's not that stretch, any muscular stretch you do, it's really important to contract that tightness, relax it, contract that tightness, relax it, move further, repeat that process long term. So it makes distinct changes immediately. As you can hopefully see, I could drop down deeper straight away. So exercise number 3 are really, really important to do. Now, the fourth exercise, again, is another hip stretch, but this time we want to go after the deeper hip joint capsule of the rest of the hip. So the couch stretch with the band has the benefit of attacking that hip capsule at the front of the hip and a lot of soft tissue that overlays that, like your iliopsoas, maybe your rec fem, some quads get sort of caught up in that as well. Using the band really gets into that and all of those structures together. The pigeon stretch does more of sort of your glute tightness that a lot of people tend to get. But deep into those glutes, we often get a stiff capsule around the back and the side of the hip, which again, can limit your rotation, can limit the amount of movement that you have at the joint. So coming back into this trusty band again. So this is brilliant for anyone who has hip impingements. Again, any knee issues, any low back issues, a lot of things become dysfunctional if this hip isn't moving very well. So what we want to do here is, again, attaching the band, pulling it laterally, so we're sort of gapping the hip joint, allowing that capsule to be mobilized better. Again, you don't need this band if you don't have one, but using the band just takes it up a bunch of notches compared to not using it. So what we want to do here is we want to imagine that this thigh muscle, this thigh bone, is pushing out the back corner of the hip. And how we do that is keeping everything together, moving the hips and shoulders as one. We're translating parallel to the ground over the top of the knee that we have on the ground here. And what you'll find is you should be able to feel some pressure at the side back corner of that hip. We want to stay there. And what you can do is you can play around with how deep into hip flexion you go. If If it jams up a little through the groin, you can come into more hip extension and then still try and find where your best version of the stretch is. One thing that I see a lot of people do is they just dump the hips across. They don't bring the shoulders along with it. And that can really alter the way that you load the hip. It stops getting that direct pressure through the hip. So try and stay integrated, shift across so that you feel some pressure coming out the backside of that hip. And the reason why this makes the list of the top 5 stretches is because it's really versatile. So this does a little bit more of the hip flexion restriction that a lot of people have. We can take out some of that hip external rotation restriction by externally rotating the hip, dropping the back leg, and then getting back into the exact same shape again. So by putting the thigh and the hip in a different position, we can target different aspects of the hip. So whereas when my leg was out straight here, I would feel it a little bit more to the side. By incorporating some external rotation and coming back across, I can feel it more towards that back pocket that was similar to that pigeon stretch that we did before. And then again, once we've done this for a minute or two, then swinging our leg out into internal rotation and then coming back across again can really target the capsule more towards the anterolateral side. So not quite the side, but a little bit towards the front. And again, if you feel like you do impinge a little bit, or if it gives you a little bit of groin issues, then come out of that hip flexion into more of a 90-degree hip position or above, and just come into whatever degree you feel comfortable gives you this good pain without the nasty stuff at the same time. And what happens is over time is that you'll find that that hip capsule frees up a lot faster. So I think that one of the things I want to promote with these exercises that are really important is that you should see immediate differences in your flexibility. So if you've done the first 4 exercises and you don't get up and feel like that area is a lot looser than it was before, then you may not have done it correctly, or you may not have done it for long enough, because you deserve to do them and see change straight away, which is one of the reasons why they make the list, because you shouldn't just be stuffing around stretching for 45 minutes a day, every day, and not seeing that compound sort of flexibility over time. So hold me to it. Let me know in the comments what you find with those exercises, because you deserve to see change. I wouldn't sort of go through them if they weren't important. So there's that. Now the final exercise really ties everything in together because it's a low back stretch. Now, one of the things I find clinically that's really powerful here is there's sections of the lower back, that mid to low back, which has a huge impact on glute function, hip flexors, hamstring injuries, quad pain, groin strains. The list goes on, but if your low back is dysfunctional, if it's stiff, if it's tight to the joints of the spine, the physical segmental facet joints of that spine, then via the nerves that come out of those areas and control and supply all the muscles in your legs, or sort of a chain reaction of dysfunction or a wave of dysfunction that travels down the leg, it's a huge underlying and often missed part of most injuries in general, but obviously running related injuries. So again, if you're someone who has plantar fasciitis, Achilles issues, calf problems, any calf problems, hamstring issues, if you've got dysfunctional quads, if you have all these quad issues that you can't quite figure out, if you're someone who has patellar tendonitis and you just haven't nailed that perfect treatment to sort of make you feel like you're working through that really quickly, there's potentially a spot in your back that's linking all that together or holding you back from feeling fantastic. So it's really important that we go after a really basic back stretch. Now, it's a little bit different to what you might expect with the roller, but you can use a roller or you can use a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball. Doesn't matter what you use. The key is that you can find the hidden stiffnesses that maybe aren't painful day to day, but as soon as you put some pressure on them, are clearly there. Now, again, you've seen me do this a lot before, but just for the purposes of this, for me, I want most people to start at the base of their rib cage, because we often think of low back as just the base of the spine, but there's a lot of dysfunction that travels down from that base of the rib cage, top of that lower back. So the way that I always recommend to do this is, again, we don't want you to roll up and down on the roller. It misses the point completely. So figuratively and literally. So because the joints in your spine are sort of segmental levels, we want to make sure that if you're rolling up and down those, you're never really getting constant pressure through the joint to affect change. You're really rolling over the top, maybe getting some muscular freedom through that, but it'll just get tight again if those deeper joints remain dysfunctional. So what I always recommend is move the roller up and down until you feel like you hit a spot that feels stiff or tight, or a level that makes you think that there's something not quite perfect there. And then just roll slightly to one side and then roll across to the other side and spend the most time on the side that feels the stiffest. So irrespective of what side your aches and pains are on, your back doesn't really work as an isolated right or left side. If you are tight, I think I've said this before on the channel, but if you are tight, for example, at this part of your back, it pulls slack from anywhere that associates with it. So it's going to pull slack from above, pull slack from underneath, pull slack from the opposite side. Now, it can create this wave of dysfunction in any direction potentially if that handbrake's there. So if you have all this pain, for example, you've got a bad hip flexor on the left-hand side, or maybe you've got a patellar tendonitis or a tendinopathy on that left side, but when you get on the ball or the roller and you find that the right-hand side is where the stiffness is, you've got to follow the stiffness, work really hard to free that up, and you might find that that'll start to restore all this natural motion and take away a whole bunch of hidden handbrakes you didn't realize were there. So again with this, and I'll switch it up to the ball just to show you. Again, we want to start in the middle and just roll off to one side, and then we just lie on the ball or the roller, and it's the easiest exercise in the world because we just want to move it around until you feel like you hit something that feels stiff, and then you want to stay here until it feels less stiff. For some people that can take a long time, so you might need to chip away at that over a matter of days. For some people it'll be relatively quick. So and once you've found that, then just move the ball up a little bit or down a little bit and go hunting for all of the spots in your back right next to that spine, so right next to the bumps down the middle that you feel are stiff and tight. And it doesn't necessarily have to be painful, but if you can pick up any subtle dysfunction, it shouldn't be there, and if it is there, then it can throw something else off. So I think the overarching idea that I want to promote with these videos, and particularly this one in terms of running, is that your body is a very sophisticated machine. It's designed to function and work a certain way in a perfect world. And if we start to introduce stiffness or rustiness to certain areas, then that starts to change the way the whole system functions, and it can spit out an injury at some point, and it can be anywhere in that system potentially. So I really want to promote us sort of getting out of that thinking where each injury is based on separate problems that are all sort of off in their own little space doing their own thing, so that treating those issues requires a whole bunch of separate interventions, when in actual fact, from what I'm finding clinically, is that there's a lot of common ground in a lot of the issues and injuries that people get from running and in day-to-day life anyway. So if you go after those sort of foundation or those touchstones of dysfunction, then there's a really strong chance that you can start to restore normal loading and normal function to that area. And if it's persistently hanging around, then it gives it a chance to start to feel more normal on top of all the specific stuff that you're doing, which I want to reiterate is still important, but it's sort of beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about today. So there we go. That's a long one, probably the longest one we've done so far. But if you found this information useful, please let me know in the comments below. If you have any particular aches and pains that you're not sure about, just comment below, let me know, I'll get back to you and hopefully provide some advice or maybe some links to another video that we've done that targets that specifically. I think we've covered most of the main things on the channel, so you're welcome to search for those yourself. But again, if you did find this useful and interesting, please consider leaving a like below. Please consider subscribing if you're new, or if you just like this kind of thinking or this type of content and you want to start to build that community feel with us, because I really want to make sure that I can get these ideas out, maybe even more than what they already are, because they're just so useful. You know, I've been a PT for 15 years now, and all the things that we've been trying and testing have sort of led us to that point of saying, look, these are some of the important things that we need to address if we're going to make any ground on these issues long term. So that's me. Thanks for watching. Again, let me know if you have any questions below, and we'll see you in the next one.